Every series has a defining moment. You probably already know what I mean. However great or not great a series might be, if you have it lodged in your memory, then you probably have one moment, one part or event that immediately comes to mind when someone mentions the story's name to you. These moments might just have personal relevance to you, or they might represent the instance in which a series truly came into itself on a grander level. Dragon Ball has the Frieza fight, One Piece has Enies Lobby, My Hero Academia has Todoroki's Declaration, and Naruto has the Sasuke Retrieval mission. If you go on to the YouTube upload for Naruto Opening 5, Rhapsody of Youth, you might find a top comment that says, "This is the arc where boys became men." I'm usually not a fan of random YouTube comments, comment sections are hell, but this one is absolutely on the money. The Sasuke Retrieval arc is, at its core, a story about innocence lost, and it is also maybe my favorite arc in all of Naruto, with only 2 other potential candidates depending on when you ask me and what mood I'm in. So this video will be less a formal recounting of these events, and more of an analysis / gushing session of all the shit that makes this arc so fucking good. I will of course mention things that bother me, nothing is perfect, but please do not misunderstand. I adore this arc. Let's not waste too much time on summaries, you all know what happens here. Sasuke, seeing the power difference between him and his brother, finally snaps and decides to join Orochimaru, giving up his body in exchange for the strength he needs to avenge his family. Naruto is joined by his actual best friend, Shikamaru, and a team consisting of Shoji, Neji, and Kiba to find and retrieve Sasuke, all the while battling the Sound Four, Orochimaru's squad of elite enforcers and Sasuke's personal guard. As I said, one of the most interesting elements of this arc to me is its relevance to the character's maturity. Before now, the evil and the ugliness of the ninja world was always on the outside, an element, a rot that was to be observed in foreign lands, or a calamity that attempted to crush the leaf and had to be pushed back. But now, with one of their own being corrupted, our cast must accept that the malice of the ninja world penetrates even their idyllic hometown, and that they, just like the adults that guided them, must now take responsibility for that. They are all forced to grow up. It's even better when you take into account that this is the final arc of Naruto's first part. The childhoods of these characters are quite literally forced to end, and it is that ending that ushers in their adulthood with part 2, or as more people know it, Shippuden. This brings me to another concrete thing I love about this arc, its placement. Where an event happens in the story is an underratedly important aspect of storytelling, as having the right element show up at the wrong time can crumble a narrative into incoherence. That's why I adore how the Sasuke arc is situated. It being the final arc of part 1 gives it a paradigmatically crucial quality, making it a monumental turning point for the series and the characters. After Sasuke leaves the village, it's not just the characters that can never truly go back to the happy days of early Naruto. The series itself must change and mature, and I love that. It's a wonderful little way of meta writing. The arc's placement also does wonders for its titular character, Sasuke, and his character progression. Based on timing and context, it's very easy to conjecture that this moment right here is where the old Sasuke dies. After being forced to relive his trauma through Itachi's Tsukuyomi, Sasuke is forever changed, and his resolve for revenge is reawakened into a self-destructive urge. I just think it's such a beautifully tragic progression to go from him learning to care for his comrades at the end of Chunin exams to him being forced back into his role as Avenger immediately after, culminating in him waking from his coma as a much darker, completely different person. This of course flows back into the idea of this arc being the death of the cast's youth. Sasuke has his adolescence killed by reliving his trauma, and his resulting action then causes the death of innocence and youth in the rest of the cast, which is just such a cool and interesting dynamic to inject into your big climax arc. It's also this dynamic that ends up pushing all the relevant characters to new heights, with the entire Sasuke rescue team having to step up and show what they're made of. Up until this point, the kids always had the safety net of the adult Jonin to fall back on. Even during the Konoha invasion, which was a huge deal, the Jonin were doing a lot of work, and while Gaara had to be dealt with by a middle schooler, the likes of Orochimaru and his goons were suppressed by the adults. Not anymore, however. From top to bottom, from the moment the mission starts to its catastrophic failure, this operation is completely up to Shikamaru's squad. And the way each of the members grows into that role of responsibility is so tremendously satisfying. From Neji accepting that he might not be the chosen one, to Choji getting probably the best single episode of the entire series, the desperate struggle against the Sound Four is such an absolute marvel, elevated by some truly great action, of course. An absolute highlight for me was Shikamaru, which is something I feel like I've said in every episode so far. I somehow had completely forgotten how great he is in part 1, or maybe I just didn't relate to him as much as a kid, as much as I do now. Which might say more about me than it does about the character, but oh well. His speech at the start of the arc, his planning during the arc, and his breakdown at his own failure at the end of the arc are such incredibly strong character moments, and they really solidify him as one of my absolute favorite characters to re-experience on this rewatch. But of course, I'd be an idiot to review this arc without talking about the main thing about it. Sasuke versus Naruto. This fight is as classic as it gets. Two rivals battling atop a historical valley, one fighting to reach the darkness, one struggling to save the other. It is the quintessential parting of two friends, and thus it has rightfully etched itself into anime history as a conflict that to this day is referenced and evoked by authors and fans alike. I think a big part of that saliency is the aesthetic and thematic presence this fight has. The entire arc is filled with top-notch action segments, but this battle is on another level, with every episode showcasing a distinct flavor of directorial and productional flair. Even series star Norio Matsumoto makes another appearance, and while his character artwork in this fight is not the greatest, especially not during the dialogue scenes, the fuck is this angle? In motion, his animation remains one of the most beautifully kinetic and malleable eye candy the series has to offer. But beyond just the looks, the emotions of the fight are so simple yet effective, and it is through that it becomes memorable. Complex conflicts are great, I love them, but there's something to be said about the potential detriment of overcomplicating a fight's premise. When the hook of your climax is as simple as, my friend is being an idiot so I'm gonna punch him until he stops, that makes it easier to remember and relive this fight as you grow and move on. And overall, the mood for this conflict is just set perfectly, and it remains one of the most salient fights in shonen because of it. Lastly, I love that the mission actually fails. Shonen has something I like to call the status quo button, which is basically just a tendency to avoid lasting consequences. This isn't even unique to shonen manga. All media aimed at children is guilty of this, as the desire to keep the premise intact so that dumb babies can watch the series out of order without getting upset inherently clashes with the idea of coherent long-form narratives. It just tends to be more apparent in shonen because it has, at least up until a few years ago, been a lot more interested in coherent narratives compared to Western TV. The point is, I fucking hate the status quo button. Change is, just like conflict, an essential part of any story. You can write without either of those two, but if you do, your story is probably boring and you are probably French. So to have a tendency in shonen where all changes and consequences are poofed away is infuriating to me. Oh, hi Dragon Ball. This arc, however, luckily avoids that trap and does the smart thing. It turns the end of part 1 into the lowest point of these characters' lives, breaking them down with a failure that motivates and drives them from this point onwards, and I must commend them for that. It would have been so easy to just have Sasuke return at the end of the arc and be like, okay, that's cool, now that we've seen that people can be corrupted, we need to have a time skip. And that could have worked, but it would have been kind of stupid, or at least not as good as what we have gotten would have been. because now that Sasuke is gone, all of these characters have to think about what that means to them and what that means to them and their growth. And I just think that that is a phenomenal way to end the first section of your story. Now, it's time to get into the negatives I had with the arc. But as I said, remember, none of these are honestly all that bad. They're kind of annoying, but that's it. I just feel it wouldn't be fair if I didn't mention them, because this is a review, at least in the title. Sakura! I'm sure everyone is fucking tired of me bitching about her, but I swear this is the last time. I'm actually watching Shippuden right now, and she's so much better in it, so this is the last time I'm bitching about her, at least for a while. Sakura manages to sneak in one last dumb moment before she gets infinitely better in Shippuden. Under the moonlight, she tells Sasuke that if he leaves her, she will feel just as bad as he felt when he saw his family die. I don't think I have to comment on this. It's dumb, it's bafflingly tone deaf, and puts a dent into what is otherwise a pretty touching scene. It's an isolated thing, like it's really just this phrase that really annoys me, but holy shit, what the fuck, Kishimoto. Since this is a re-watch and not a reread, I do have to mention the issue specific to the anime, of which there is one in this arc. Filler. Remember how I gushed about the placement of the arc? Yeah, that only works if you skip the filler, because not only does the anime ruin Sasuke's character arc by having him wake up from the coma as his regular self to go on a boring filler mission, it also continues the series past the Sasuke arc for 90 whole episodes. And it's not like you can just pretend that these filler parts don't exist. The filler arc before Sasuke's betrayal is actually referenced in his canon conviction to join Orochimaru, and the actual ending of the arc, Naruto leaving with Jiraiya, only happens at the end of the 90-episode filler marathon, and isn't even given its own episode, instead being relegated to the final few minutes of a filler arc about Gaara playing yo-yo. So for the new anime watcher, a huge aspect of the arc is tarnished, which is a huge shame. Next, while I do love the consequences this arc has, I think it actually could have gone a little bit further, in that it should probably have killed off a few characters. Don't get me wrong, characters dying means good writing is an anime take I fucking loathe, but in this case, I do think a few corpses could have made the impact more devastating, namely 3 corpses. Shoji absolutely should have died. Not just because he is hurt, but because the story would have been better for it. He doesn't really do anything after this point anyway, aside from the Asuma stuff in Shippuden, which can be handled via Shikamaru. So in my opinion, having him die after such a phenomenal send-off would have been much better, especially if you consider how much harder it would hit Shikamaru and how much more bitterly it would reinforce the realization that the responsibility of being a Chunin comes at a price. Neji is not as necessary, but I do think he had a good chance to leave the story. And again, he isn't really needed in Shippuden, so like why not? But I also do like his death in the war arc, so this one is kind of whatever. But speaking of does nothing in Shippuden, Lee should have absolutely bit the dust here. He is the character everyone points to when talking about how Part 2 underutilized the sidecast, so he really has no business being there. Meanwhile, killing him off in his fight against Kimimaru would have done a couple of things. As a symbol of youth, Lee's death would further enforce the idea of innocence lost, which, as I said, is one of the most impactful aspects of this arc for me. Additionally, it would actually give his injuries a lasting weight. The surgery might seem like a success at first, but the punishment for his recklessness against Gaara dooming him in the end is more interesting and tragic than him just being magically healed and never having troubles again. And lastly, and most importantly, his death could have interpersonal influence. The reformed Gaara seeing Lee valiantly die against Kimimaru as a result of injuries he got from their fight at the Chunin exams could make him think more deeply about his past actions and drive him more convincingly towards his eventual position as Kazekage. At the same time, Lee's death could catalyze Guy into reconsidering his life philosophies, something that is hinted at when he sees Lee's injuries but is never really followed up upon. If Guy is allowed to witness a student dying as a result of his philosophy, you automatically push him into an interesting dilemma, one that could inform his increased relevance in Shippuden and his eventual deathmatch against Madara. I do realize that suggestions like these take a lot of extra work, and it's not quite as easy as just saying, keep him dead or keep him alive or whatever. But at the same time, I do think that any consequences these deaths could have had would have been better than what we eventually got. Because don't forget, one of the biggest problems with Shippuden that pretty much everyone agrees upon is that it underutilizes the cast. And one way of shrinking the cast without underutilizing anyone is to kill them off in good ways, which I think this arc had a good chance to do, but didn't, which, you know, whatever, but it's cool to think about. My final issue is not one that exists just in this arc, but is more like a general problem of the entirety of Naruto. It just starts here. With this turning point comes a paradigm shift, as the series becomes predicated on not just Naruto becoming Hokage, but also on Naruto saving his friendship with Sasuke. And that friendship does not exist. At least not on screen. Naruto and Sasuke are only both Leaf Ninja and able to interact for 2 arcs, Land of Waves and Chunin exams, both of which don't really focus on the relationship all that much. It's more like a secondary feature. At best, you could say that at the end of Chunin exams, the two have learned to tolerate each other, which is fine for a rivalry, but when the entire series becomes reliant on that relationship's profound emotionality, that simply isn't enough anymore. When Naruto and Sasuke stand in the final valley and scream about how they were like brothers and understood each other like no one else, that falls completely flat because no such friendship has ever been built up, not to this magnitude at least. And it's clear that Kishimoto and Studio Pierrot were aware of this, as both the manga and the anime would continue to inject flashbacks to their childhoods into the story later on to convince us that they were actually friends. But that is simply too little, too late. Again, I don't think it's a badly written friendship, I think it's just not expanded enough before this moment to predicate 15 years of writing on. A better way to fix this would have been to add one more story arc between Chunin exams and Tsunade, where, due to the Jonin forces being exhausted and Sakura's injuries, Naruto and Sasuke are sent on a mission together where they have to cooperate on their own, something low-key, short, that just forces them to be in a space together and actually develop their friendship. It would have been short, easy, and efficient, but I do realize this suggestion is 20 years too late and kind of pointless. So, in conclusion, this arc is fantastic and I love it so much. I was in middle school when I first got to watch it, and I still remember how much it affected me, seeing these characters go through this shit. Any issues I have are, certainly there, but I don't care too much. Actually, for the most part, it's fun to try and imagine how to iron out these few imperfections. As a kid, I was obsessed with this arc. I would rewatch the German episodes, or at least episode clips on YouTube over and over again. I would replay the entirety of Naruto Ninja Storm just to rewatch the cutscenes. It was magical, and no issues that I have identified on my rewatch could take away from that. No unnecessary suspense. 9 out of 10, amazing finale to part 1. And we are done. At least with the original run of Naruto. This series was a lot of fun, and if you enjoyed it, please let me know and tell me if you would like me to do Shippuden as well. I am watching it anyways, so if you have the interest, just tell me. As long as you guys keep wanting these, I will keep making them. But for now, thank you for watching, and a special thank you to our patrons, including Christian Finkbeiner, Erina, Fiction Ape, Kendra Williams, Sini, Zanji1, and Mr. Meander. That's it for me. Thanks for watching, take care, and be safe. Bye bye.